The Daleks have grown to be the most significant monster in Doctor Who's history. They are the monster that not just the fans but the whole nation loves to hate. But when Doctor Who rose from the ashes in 2005, they were given more than just a visual redesign. Russell T Davies and Robert Shearman entirely reinvented the Daleks in just 2.5 hours. Today I'll be looking at just how the Daleks rose to fame and then became a joke in the public perspective, and how two immensely talented writers acknowledged the jokes and inverted them to make the show's most terrifying monster. The Daleks' conception dates back to 1963 at the dawn of the show, and it's reliant on a man called Terry Nation. The initial concept for the Daleks was based on racial extermination by the Nazis, as well as advanced warfare such as the use of nuclear weapons, both of which were very real threats at the time. You need to remember that World War II was very fresh in people's mind, and both of these things were highly feared concepts that made an appearance in the real world during this period. It's of no secret that the Daleks are blatant metaphors for Nazis. This however adds to the very real threat of them. Doctor Who has always created fear by adding to very mundane subjects, but the Daleks hardly had to add anything because the subject at hand is already terrifying and ever prevalent. The Daleks are just as terrifying now as they were back in 1963 because Holocaust-like events are still being practiced around the world in the current day, and with the fear of nuclear war still a relevant topic, the Daleks really do struggle to outdate themselves. The human element of the Daleks is what retains them as the most popular monster. This is the same case as the Cybermen. If the Daleks were full-on robots, then the horror aspect would be completely taken away from them and the audience would struggle to see them as a threat after nearly 60 years. The human nature of the Daleks calls home and adds a layer of reflection to the creatures. It creates the fear that this one day could be a possibility. The Daleks continue to be established as a developed monster with the introduction to Supreme Daleks, Dalek ranks, and of course the Emperor Dalek. This once again adds another layer of realism, relating back to the totalitarian-like representation of the Daleks. In the 1960s, what was then dubbed Dalek Mania was at the height of its popularity. The Daleks were an off-screen success as well as on-screen, and not just for TV. The Daleks were soon given 2 feature-length cinema adaptations of their first outing, starring Peter Cushing as the Doctor. They were featured in comics, books, and annuals. The 1967 serial The Evil of the Daleks was intended to be the final Dalek story in the TV series, as Terry Nation had plans to take them across the pond to launch an American spin-off series. Even if you've never watched the show, every single person from the UK will be able to at least identify a Dalek from their signature look. The metal skirt, the domed head with the single eye stalk, and the comical plunger and whisk. The fact that the Nation is aware of these fiends once again creates the very real sense of fear whenever they are seen. However, when we reach the late 70s, we begin to meet the decline of the Daleks. The show began demoralising the Daleks by portraying them as less threatening antagonists, or even forgetting the entire purpose of their being, in stories like Destiny of the Daleks where they're treated like robots and not actual colored mutants. Eric Sayward introduced the premise of the Dalek Civil War, where 2 factions of Daleks who deem each other impure are at war with one another. This is a great concept, in theory. The idea of the Daleks turning against their own due to the burning hatred for anything that is remotely different, be it the flavour of blobs that sit inside the casing in this scenario, is an awesome idea. However, when it comes to stories like Remembrance of the Daleks, which I have praised in the past, it faces the Daleks off on Earth. It takes all the meaning away from the Daleks, seeing them patrol the streets of London, however they're not here for the humans, they're using it as a battleground to fight one another. The Daleks should be slaughtering the entire human race, which we had previously seen. It takes away the fear from us as residents of the planet watching the episode and almost gives it to the Daleks. Now I'm sure if a family of Imperial Daleks sat around the TV and watched this at 4 rails past 7 on a Saturday, they would be terrified. Except the audience aren't Daleks, they're human, and it relocates all of the fear into each side of the Dalek rather than the easiest target. After the cancellation of Classic Who in 1989, the Daleks were still the forefront of the show within the Wilderness years, appearing in audio dramas, books and comics, but most prominently in parodies. Beyond the show though, the Daleks were becoming more than a joke. And to be honest, it starts to make sense. They look ridiculous. The classic design was mocked, and quite rightly too. I mean, look at it, the stupid bug-eyed headpiece, the flashing Mini Cooper lights, the beyond hilarious plunger and egg whisk. That is supposed to be the most threatening part. Hell, even the hemispheres were being mocked. All of the aforementioned, along with the garish bright paint jobs, made the Daleks a laughingstock. They were at the forefront of every joke on British television, and once something is seen as a joke, it's hard to redeem any serious qualities. This is also unfortunately the case as seen with the Sontarans in the Stephen Moffat era. And so it was. What were once perceived as a national treasure and a very real threat to the audience had now become the expense of near enough every joke that could possibly be made involving British television. During the Wilderness years, there were some redeeming factors. There's this little story called The Children of the Revolution from the 8th Doctor's DWM run that really brings the Daleks back for me. But of course, not many actually read this comic, and the Daleks were still in the nation's peripherals as a novelty. However, this was all about to change, when 2 men brought the Daleks back and redeemed all of their previously missing qualities in just under 2.5 hours. When Russell T Davies single-handedly rose Doctor Who from the ashes in the early 2000s, it was unclear if he was able to bring the Daleks back due to a legal dispute with the Terry Nation estate. Thankfully though, after the British public complained, because that's what we're good at, the case was won over and the Daleks were allowed for use within the first season of Doctor Who. If this hadn't been the case, writer Robert Shearman had prepared an alternative monster to stand in the Daleks' place, called the Future Human, that would kill for pleasure. This monster would soon be reused in the Series 3 finale and would be known as the Toclophane. The thing that makes Series 1 so amazing is that it was written by experts. The episodes were penned by fans of the show, devoted audience members who had previously written for the expanded media and knew exactly what they were doing. Dalek was an adaptation of one of Robert Shearman's earlier works for Big Finish, called Jubilee. It's more or less the same story, except of course the TV adaptation features the 9th Doctor instead of the 6th. The script went through about 14 revisions, but finally the story Dalek was made. The plot revolves around an egocentric tycoon situated in Utah who flogs alien goods that fall to Earth. A little bit of like Jeff Bezos' own Torchwood. Owner Henry Van Staten is keeping a Metaltron on the lower levels of the base. The way this story not just introduces the Daleks to the newcomers but reintroduces them to the classic fans is genius. We are offered perspectives from multiple points of view. Shearman sides the newer viewers with the Dalek and against the Doctor, but also opposes the classic fans against the new, by contrasting the Doctor and Rose and conflicting the two together. The Doctor and the classic fans know the Daleks and what they're capable of. People who are new to the show are represented in Rose. When presented with this tortured creature for the first time, she can't help but feel sympathetic towards it, unaware of its capabilities. This creates the opportunity to be either on the Doctor or Rose's side and both be in the right. Robert Shearman is genuinely a genius for creating a script where you can go down two moral paths and meet the same conclusion. The first time we see the Dalek in New Who, it's actually from a POV shot. It may just seem like a clever way of covering up the Dalek before it's revealed later on, but again, it offers yet another standpoint on the situation. When you see the POV shot of the Dalek, it isn't just sitting in its cage, it's being tortured by a human. This subverts the expectation of the viewer. The Dalek is first presented as a weak and feeble creature screaming in pain. This also foreshadows the latter events of the story by villainising the humans who were to blame all along. When the Doctor first comes face to face with the Dalek, it's shot in such a way that holds the attention of the viewer. The dimly lit room with nothing but the Dalek's eye stalk timidly glowing in the distance creates an eerie atmosphere that in hindsight is staring the Doctor right in the face. When the Dalek utters its first syllables and its headlights glow, the expression on Christopher Eccleston's face sells it all. We can't yet see the Dalek, but we can see the effects of it. The Doctor, who has hated these creatures for as many years as he's lived, carries all of the emotion on his face. I would be lying if I didn't say Christopher Eccleston completely sold this scene and made it the best that it could be. But the Dalek is shot in such a way that presents it as an immediate threat despite it being unchanged and damaged to the point of no returning. The swelling orchestra as the camera pans out revealing the last living Dalek as the lights come up creates a horrifying visualscape. But once again, Shearman subverts the expectation of the viewer by presenting the Dalek as powerless. As the Doctor discovers that its gun isn't working, he beams with joy and begins to mock the Dalek. The Doctor is now the villain and the Dalek is innocent. This once again foreshadows the perspective of the newer viewers who are probably confused as to why this is all happening and makes you begin to side with the Dalek. It also poses the question as to who is really innocent in the Time War. This is further realised in the following dialogue where the Dalek begins to make the Doctor feel sorry for it. This is where the empathy comes in as more exposition of the Time War is spilled. The empathy is directed at both the Doctor and the Dalek, so this can leave the viewer morally conflicted as to who is the bad guy. As it turns out, they are just as bad as each other. Nicholas Briggs also brings the Dalek voices back to life. Again, something that was thoroughly mocked in the past. The way each word is pronounced adds to the entire performance, managing to convey a sense of emotion in an otherwise monotonous voice. Exacerbating this is the crunchy yet boomy ring modulation used to recreate that tone that we're all familiar with. The Doctor warns Van Staten of the Dalek's danger, which acts as a further exposition to the newer fans. The next time we see the Dalek, it's from Rose's perspective, and she's never seen or even heard of a Dalek before, so naturally when she sees a life form being tortured, she is sympathetic towards it. Once again, the score conveys all the emotion of this scene. The solemn strings backing up the lifeless voice as Nicholas Briggs changes his performance at the flick of a switch, and is suddenly playing the nice guy. The duality of the Dalek adds a whole new layer to it. Rather than it hating all life, it favours those who are sympathetic. And then it all changes as Rose touches the Dalek and we get an on-screen rebirth. The background radiation on Rose awakens the Dalek and gives it a resurgence of life. The first thing that the Dalek does with its new lease of life is to tackle the biggest joke of their history and turn it into a threat. The manipulator arm was always mocked because yes, it is a sink plunger, but Shearman tramples this stereotype into the ground by turning the largest satirical asset of the Dalek and making it a threat. The fact that this is acknowledged in the script adds to the bleak yet slightly comedic and above all threatening reinvention of the Dalek. All of the old-fashioned stereotypes and jokes of the Daleks are eliminated within this 45-minute epic, and most of this is conveyed through the design of the Dalek and its functions. Gone is the smooth, round, shiny finish of the headpiece, and now what appears is a bulky, metallic, tank-like casing. The bolts and sharp edges make the Dalek seem like a proper fighting tank. The 2005 design really puts the 1963 models to shame. Even the hemispheres, which were once sneered at, are given a really bleak purpose. The bulky feeling given to this Dalek once again hammers home the war aspect. Even the colour scheme is outstanding. Bronze is not an admirable colour, it doesn't have to be. The Daleks are no longer caught up by cosmetic imperfections, they are just designed to kill. I will admit maybe a gunmetal grey or black might have looked better, but considering the lighting and direction in Dalek and Parting of the Ways, I'm not sure it would have worked as well as the bronze. The scene where the Dalek escapes from the cage and patrols its way across the room is amazing. The way the humans are hopelessly firing at the Dalek whilst it is silent, slowly gliding towards them, is terrifying. The Dalek hasn't actually done anything yet, but it's already the most convincing monster of the series. And once again, if the Dalek wasn't threatening enough, it has downloaded the entire internet and has all knowledge inside its head. Once more, the Dalek conducts all of the power from the building and giving it enough energy to restore its entire body. The sheer power of the Dalek is converted in one amazing scene in which it makes its way effortlessly through the corridor and wipes out a set of troops in a matter of seconds. The way the bullets seemingly slow down and disintegrate before they hit the Dalek gives the impression that it is completely impregnable force. Further proving this point, and once again busting another stereotype, is where the rotating body comes into play. A Dalek's weak point in Classic Who would usually be getting pushed from behind down a corridor. But the new Dalek has no behind. The gun box rotates 360 degrees, meaning it's defensive at all angles. We are left on a truly grim sequence in which Van Statten and the Doctor hear the bullets being fired from the soldiers that slowly die out at the hand of the Dalek. This displays the sheer power that just one Dalek can possess. Once again, another stereotype is disputed in the staircase scene. The classic joke that is once again acknowledged in the script is that the only thing that can stop a Dalek is a flight of stairs. But of course the audience is proven wrong as the Dalek slowly and silently drifts up the stairwell, rapidly approaching the soldier. Now I know that you're all screaming at your screen right now telling me that this happened in 1988, and yes, I know, but it seems that most of the British public forgot about that, and it seems so much better to have it placed in this episode as part of a sequence that is devoted to disputing all of the satirical stereotypes of the classic Daleks. It was sort of uncalled for and didn't really play into a massive part of the plot when the Dalek flew in remembrance of the Daleks. The soldiers of the base then begin to attack the Dalek as it glides into the hallway, where there is a brilliant massacre-like scene. The soldiers begin shooting their bullets at the Dalek, but it is pointless. The Dalek remains stationary in the centre as it slowly begins to elevate off the ground and shoots the fire alarm, setting off the sprinklers. The Dalek then proceeds to fire at the water, sending out a surge of electricity, wiping out every soldier in one movement. There is an excellent confrontation between the Ninth Doctor and the Dalek, in which the Dalek questions its purpose without a leader. The Dalek reveals the fact that it just scanned the entire universe to find the other Daleks, but found out that it is genuinely the last Dalek. This adds another layer to the previous sequence, almost as if the killings were out of frustration. The Dalek decides to follow its primary instinct to kill, showing that even without backup, as the only Dalek left in existence, it still has the driving force to brutally destroy anything that stands in its path. The effects of the Time War are most noticeable in this scene, and Christopher Eccleston's performance sells it.
Rid the universe of your filth! Why don't you just die? You would make a good Dalek.
That line just gives me chills every time. The pause beforehand, the empty silence that complements the dialogue perfectly. The Doctor had never been portrayed this way before, and it shows just how badly the Daleks have an effect on him, showing the extreme lengths that the Doctor is pushed to. The Dalek chases Rose down a hallway and into a corner. There is no hope for her, but the Dalek just can't kill Rose, and it's confused to why. Rose offers the Dalek anything in exchange for it taking the life of Van Statten. The Dalek wishes to see the sunlight one last time. It opens its casing and bathes in the light. This is where the two approaches clash, where the two perspectives of the Dalek meet. The Doctor confronts the Dalek with a gun, whereas Rose comforts it. She gives the Dalek a second chance and argues with the Doctor over his moralities. She manages to change his mind and see the fact that the Dalek is an innocent creature, and the Doctor shows pity towards his oldest enemy. The Dalek begins to feel disgusted at the thought that it's evolving into something non-Dalek, since it absorbed Rose's DNA. This goes to show the true evil of the Daleks. Their burning hate for something different, the feeling that keeps the Dalek going, is what kills them in the end. The Dalek is so sickened by its own impurity that it kills itself. Now that is how you do a Dalek story. Robert Shearman successfully brought back Doctor Who's most iconic monster after a 15-year gap and proved him to be the most threatening to date. He reinvented what had become a joke to the audience at this point by exterminating all of the tropes and gags that the Daleks had possessed and inverting them. Robert Shearman single-handedly pulled the Daleks out of the ashes and turned them into something that could never be forgotten. But it doesn't end there, because this isn't the Daleks' only outing in the 2005 Revived series. Russell T Davies brought them back for the two-part finale and made them even more menacing and devious than before. I won't go into a whole load of detail for the finale because I intend on making a separate video for this masterpiece. Midway through the series, the Doctor and Rose visit Satellite 5 in the far future, where all the information in the world is transmitted from. The Doctor destroys the creature controlling Satellite 5, allowing the human race to accelerate. Later on in the series, the Doctor and Rose return, but this time with Captain Jack in the episode Bad Wolf, where they are placed in deadly game shows controlled by the station, and if you lose, you die. The Doctor and Jack escape from the games with their newly found friend Linda, but Rose is killed. The Doctor, Jack and Linda take charge and discover that rather than the contestants being killed, they get transported across space to the edge of the solar system. The Doctor cancels out the signal that is hiding the location of the contestants to find 200 Dalek ships. 500,000 Daleks just waiting in the edge of space. The Daleks contact the Doctor and we're given one of the best cliffhangers in the history of the show, but not for the Doctor. This is a cliffhanger for the Daleks. It goes back to Dalek and how multiple perspectives were offered, but it does seem a little odd here, considering everybody knows how evil the Daleks are at this point. Either way, Parting of the Ways opens up and delves straight into the action. The Daleks fire a missile directly at the TARDIS, but the Doctor and Jack are able to make a force field with the help of the extrapolator that they picked up in the previous story, Boomtown. The TARDIS materialises on top of Rose and a Dalek, and they arrive inside the TARDIS. Now, the might of a Dalek is slightly undermined here when Jack is able to destroy it using a gun, although there are some redeeming factors. The first one being that was all of the weapon's power, and the second being that the Dalek in Utah had just received a massive boost of energy. It makes it a nice sequence, and we begin to see the effects of the Time War on the Doctor as he begins to realise that the Time Lords died in vain. He leaves the TARDIS to face the Daleks and meets the Emperor Dalek. This is what makes the Daleks so good in this episode. Not just the fact that there are 500,000 of them, it's the fact that all 500,000 are serving their god. The Emperor created all of these Daleks, therefore he develops a god complex. There's a lot of religious imagery in this episode, with the whole idea that the Emperor of the Daleks is the god and the Doctor is the heathen. Now this is where the Daleks prove to be truly menacing. It's revealed that the Dalek mothership fell through time and waited for centuries in the dark space. They manipulated the planet Earth as they quietly turned all of the refugees and prisoners into Daleks. The fact that the Daleks are half human is driving them insane. Considering the effects we saw it have on one Dalek earlier on in the series, it's hard to imagine what it would do to 500,000 soldiers. They are in such belief that they are impure they begin to deny the fact. They hate their own flesh. Remember earlier when I was saying how the human element is what drives the horror of the Daleks home for the audience? Well, that is perfectly displayed here. The Daleks are made out of human corpses, but the flesh has been altered to the point where there is no traces of impurity. This brings back the fascist implications of the original Daleks. Russell has taken things that Terry Nation did to make the Daleks scary, and combined them with Shearman's previous efforts to make the ultimate Dalek, just as the Emperor Dalek had done in the story by combining Kaleds and humans. This also calls back to the potential idea of using the Toclophane instead of the Daleks. Future humans turn into monsters inside their metal casing. Come to think of it, the design is pretty similar, or is that just me? And whilst we're here, how am I the only person to have seen that obvious foreshadowing in part 1? The Doctor is putting on such a brave face in front of the Daleks, aided by his little quirks, but when he enters the TARDIS and just rests his head against the door, the true fear and rage is shown. There is no dialogue in this scene, but it speaks so much. The Daleks begin their attack not just on the game station, but on the planet Earth as well. The only problem is that we don't actually see much of what happens on Earth. Not that we particularly need it to. The drastic effects are covered well enough in the scene where Linda sees the continents being bombed and their shapes changing on the map. This also related back to what I was saying about Remembrance of the Daleks. They don't just ignore the fact there is an entire planet below them. They don't just hover over the Earth and use it as a battleground. They begin to blaze the planet and destroy all life. Jack descends to level 0, where there are 100 stranded citizens. John Barrowman gives an amazing performance in this scene. The citizens deny the existence of the Daleks, which is what Russell T Davies does so well. The world building. Everybody on Earth has heard of the Daleks. Apart from Donna, I still have no idea how she did that. This adds an element of realism, not just to the story, but the entire era. The Doctor begins to build a delta wave that will wipe out all life in its radius. He gives Rose false hope and uses this to send her home because he knows there is no way to stop the Daleks. I won't be talking about any of the interconnecting scenes with Rose on Earth because it's not important to the Daleks, but don't worry as I will be covering this episode in more detail in the future. The Daleks arrive at the game station and begin their attack. What makes the Daleks so good in this episode is the way they look. Joe Ahern's direction, accompanied by the stunning CGI, makes the Daleks look spectacular. The fleets of thousands of oncoming Daleks look stunning. The way they all roll into floor 494 silently, the bronze soldiers blending in with the dark and gritty hallways of Satellite 5. One amazing sequence after another, the massacre begins. The Daleks begin to kill off all of the soldiers on the game station as they fire their useless weapons at them. There is a haunting line here as the volunteers find out that Jack had lied about the bullets working. The Daleks begin making their way up the elevator shaft before slowing down and descending to floor 0. They proceed to kill all 100 people on floor 0 just because they can. The Daleks' mission was on floor 500. They had nothing attracting them to floor 0 apart from the fact that there is life unlike them. This shows the Daleks to be the most brutal form we have seen to date. And if that wasn't enough, they begin to burn through the door to the observation deck where Linda stays. Remember that the Doctor claims that this side of the satellite is built to withstand meteors, and even still the Daleks break through. They go through all of that effort just to kill one human. And the extermination is excellent, the silence of space cancelling out the voice. You still know what the Dalek is saying by the flashing headlights without hearing it. This scene is gruesome. Jack continues to fight as the only human left on the game station despite the fact there is no hope. He knows he's going to die, but continues fighting, right to the last bullet. He dies in glory to save the Doctor. The Daleks reach floor 500 just as the Delta Wave is ready. This scene is dripping with atmosphere. This is what the entire series has led up to. The Doctor is given the chance to wipe out all Dalek life again, just as he was in the Time War. But this time he has to get it right. The Emperor Dalek toys with the Doctor and asks him,
"What are you, coward or killer?"
Coward. Any day.
The fact the Doctor refuses to massacre all life a second time proves how far he has come. This whole series is a redemption arc for 9. I know I said I wouldn't talk too much about the non-Dalek stuff, but it's just so hard to ignore. The Doctor accepts his fate of death, but is saved by Rose after she absorbs the energy of the time vortex and wipes out the Daleks with her powers. The only thing that could stop the Daleks was the raw energy of time, and even still they are defiant up to the last moment. This demonstrates the sheer power of the Daleks and how far they are willing to go to prove themselves as the supreme beings of the universe. So there we have it. That is exactly how Robert Shearman and Russell T Davies shaped the Daleks into something brand new. How two men single-handedly exterminated every single trope and joke that could possibly be made at them, and turned the Daleks into a threat. How Terry Nation created these horrifying creatures, how they grew stale, how Robert Shearman reinvented them for the new era of Who, and how Russell T Davies combines all of the previous elements to make the finest model of Dalek whilst resurrecting Doctor Who and making the best series ever. This is the peak of not just Doctor Who as a whole, but the Daleks. They have never been scarier before, and they have never been scarier since.